All right. Okay, so the title of today's class is Hands-on Instruction for Safe and Efficient ChatGPT Use. It's kind of wordy. I probably should have asked ChatGPT to make a shorter one, but can't do everything for me. So we are Integrate Detroit. We volunteer to get towards our mission of supporting software engineering capabilities, the development of software engineering capabilities within Detroit, and to reduce the race and gender gap amongst software technologists in Detroit. And of course, our free classes online are available outside of Detroit too. We try and expand to wherever we can help that. So I am Joe Colburn. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about myself. I've been doing software development in one form or another for many, many years. This gray beard didn't get gray by itself. So I've had a lot of experience with a lot of emerging technologies and seen a lot of things come and go. And so yeah, hopefully I have some experience to bring today. Here's what our agenda, well, this is not our agenda, but this is what we're kind of hoping to take away from today. We'll talk a little bit about access to ChatGPT and API keys. We're not going to dig too much into that, but we will talk about details that you would want to include when you're working with ChatGPT and things you want to redact, which is arguably more important sometimes. When to prompt less and more, which is a bit along the same lines, but slightly different concept. Prompt priming, if you don't know what that is, don't worry, we will explain that. And how to get more confidence in your answers from ChatGPT. And then also formatting and verbosity. And you should plan to leave today with the tools to get the most from ChatGPT. At least in the state it is today, and maybe some ideas about how, as it emerges and changes, how you might change your prompts and work with it in different ways. And I should say too, if anyone has questions, drop them in chat. I'll try and keep an eye on that and address those as we go. Some things we will have a list of terms that I may jump to instead of waiting till the end. We'll see how it goes. So here is our agenda. We have an icebreaker coming right up, and then we'll talk about how to set up a ChatGPT, which is kind of our default slide for classes, but there's really not a lot to set up. It's just logging in or creating an account if you don't have one. And then we'll talk about security and privacy, which kind of go hand in hand. And we'll discuss pro prompts, how to build a prompt in a way that gets you the best responses. And then better output, which is different from getting the best responses. It's more about getting the most out of your out of the format of your response. And we'll get into that a little later. And then we're going to do it live. We're going to go to ChatGPT and throw some things at it and see what happens. So we'll do that all together. We're going to get different responses too. So what you get may be maybe better or worse than what I get. We'll see. So let's dive in with the icebreaker. What actor or actress do you think should play you in a movie about your life? And I phrased it that way, should play you, because it may be about what you think, or it may be about what someone who is maybe your doppelganger or something. I don't have chat open. So let me get chat open real quick there.
See Lily Tomlin.
All right. I didn't even think. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I said it looks like a lot of people don't have an answer
Yeah,
immediately.
I was just realizing I don't think I thought about the answer for myself. Who would play me?
Okay. Oh, Johnny
Johnny Knoxville.
Knoxville. I like
Oh,
that. Bold.
Amy Feldstein. All right, I'm gonna have to look that one up.
It's Jonah Hill's sister. She starred in
Uh,
Booksmart. I
okay.
think we look vaguely similar, and she's got a cool sense of humor. Tom Cruise.
Oh, nice. Same birthday. Okay. I think I might go with Jack Black. She's just crazy. Okay. All right. Let's get into setting up your account, right? That's next. Okay. So setting up your account, like I said, it's a super simple process. We'll give a couple minutes if someone hasn't done it. I see Keanu Reeves, nice. Um, so if you haven't done this yet, go to chat.openai.com and you can throw /auth/log in there and it'll put you right on the page where you can sign up or log in. I see some people joining as well. We're not too far in. We just did an icebreaker and a little introduction. So we're just about to really get into the meat of it. You haven't missed anything yet. So we'll give a couple minutes for that to for people to go to this link, and I'll show you where that goes. Essentially, it just looks like this, where you can log in or sign up. I'm already logged in, but if you go to sign up, what's it do? It's just going to go to my chats. No, okay. So it gives you an opportunity to choose how you want to sign up here. The
Oh,
easiest way,
Joe. Joe, I already have a question.
yeah.
When you're signing up for an account, do you know a good way to like create some anonymity? That word. Do you know
Uh,
how to make it like more private so it's harder to tell like the person that you are that you're signing up for this account?
um, yeah. So I guess one way you could do it is you could create a different Google account that isn't tied to your normal Google account, and then that way you could change profiles, switch to that Google account, and then just log in with that. And then if you want true anonymity, I'm not going to try it either. If you want to be
Anonymity.
anonymous, thank you.
Thank you.
If you want to be anonymous throughout that process, the real trick there then is to not do anything else in that browser session on that account that would tie that account back to anything else. So yeah, if you want to keep something truly anonymous, you would do it with a completely separate account that you don't use anywhere else. So that's what the process looks like for signing up. We'll go ahead and keep moving here.
Can I
RJ,
add to that? Can I add to the answer that you just gave?
yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so there's a lot of ways you can access ChatGPT besides OpenAI, and you can go to, first of all, you can go to Bing, and as long as you're using an Edge browser, you can access ChatGPT 4 right away, and it's also connected to the internet, so it has access to the latest information. And then you can also go to sites like Poe.com, which is a playground for ChatGPT bots, and you'll be able to pick from a variety of different ChatGPTs there. And I could also put in the chat a bunch of other places you could go to access ChatGPT without, many of them you don't even have to sign in or anything.
Yeah, and there's one thing that I would add about that too, is that ChatGPT by default does have it does collect your information that you put in, and we're about to get into the security and privacy portion of that. Kind of a sneak peek into an upcoming slide here. One of the things that I'll warn against is I'm overly cautious, so take it with a grain of salt. But I'm a little skeptical of any website that offers an interface for free into something that's new and popular and hot. And that's not to say that you shouldn't trust any of those things. It's just that when you do put something into any of the third-party sites, there's a little bit less trust there if you don't know what they're doing with your data. For example, I don't know, I think a lot of people don't read the privacy policies of websites. I think that's a pretty fair, broad statement. And even if you do, sometimes they're a little hard to discern what's really happening with your data when you put it in. ChatGPT, we kind of know because it's more in the limelight that that they do use your data for training. So anything you put in there will be used for training, and some of their staff have access to see what you're typing in. So that's something to keep in mind. And third-party sites, for example, I could launch a site tomorrow that has a privacy policy that says, I take all of your data and sell it. And I don't take any care to anonymize your data at all. And if I did that, I could have a site that is free and offers some value, but there's some risk there for people who use it. So just to throw out the bit of caution about additional sites, although I do like the tip, there's definitely lots of good resources that probably don't have anything really to worry about. It's just something that you should look at their privacy policy and make sure you know how they're using your data. Okay, so that said, let's dive in. That's a great segue actually into the security and privacy portion, which probably isn't the largest part of the talk today, but or the class today, but it's definitely important. One of the things that comes to mind, especially as a software engineer, is the caution that our clients have with people using ChatGPT. If you have a large client, they may just outright ban it and even block it. ChatGPT or Bard or similar generative AI bots. And the reason for that is because what you share with it does get stored, can get fed back out if it's part of a learning data. So you type something in and the interface or the generative AI learns from it, then someone else asks a similar question. Some of that code may be spit back out to someone else later. So that's something that we definitely have to keep in mind. And it's a reason why some larger companies and even smaller companies may block it or ask you to not use it at all. If you are not blocked from using it, there's ways that you can mitigate those concerns, and using it responsibly and letting your clients and your company know how you're using it responsibly will go a long way to keep you from getting blocked from using it, I think, in many cases. So the questions I put on this slide are, is my data safe? And I guess it's just the one question. And the answer is really no. It's kind of a broad stroke answer. But I would say this is the answer for anything you put into a form online. If you don't know explicitly that it is safe and private, then you should probably assume it's not. And in this case, it's definitely not, because we've already heard that ChatGPT will use your information for training data and that kind of thing. They do have some privacy controls, so they're not just sharing your chats out with everyone, not on purpose anyway. But still, that caution has to be there, right? Because if you put something in there, it's not just your information or your company's anymore. And then there's ways that you can do that. We'll get into that in a little bit. So is that code secure? This is another topic that comes to mind every time I ask ChatGPT for code. Again, it's got some controls in place to help it not be a bad actor or not be abused by bad actors. But that doesn't mean that code you get back from it is fast or that it's secure or perfect. So there's definitely a need to take a look at any code that you get back from it and any code that you're using. I think I mixed my slides up here. And this is more about code that you're using, where there's probably thousands at this point of repositories on GitHub, for example, that make use of ChatGPT's API, and they're not going to use their own API key or share it for that matter. So most of them, any of them that need an API key to work, which is going to be a lot of them, they're going to ask you to put your API key somewhere in the code or in an environment variable or that kind of thing. And again, I proceed with an abundance of caution. And it's not to say that any of these are bad. I'm sure that a couple of them might be. But it's just to say that you should look at code that uses your API key and just follow it through. And you don't have to understand Python or whatever the code is written in. You don't have to understand it completely to get kind of a gist of how the code works. But what you should do, and this is how I kind of work with any of these tools, is take a look at the repository itself. And you can see up in the top right on GitHub anyway, how many people are following that code and how many stars it has. That's somewhat of an indicator. The more eyes that are on a repository or project like that, the more likely it is that someone will call out if there is a problem. Another thing that you could do is pull down the code and look at the instructions and see where it asks for your API key. Look at where it's storing it and just follow that through in the code. Just search for that environment or that API key variable and see, make sure it's not sharing things out. So those are kind of some things that you can do to help in that process. And that goes into the guard your API key. That's just more of a general statement. It goes into the statement of, using other people's code, but also just in general, your API key, when you set up and let me take a step back. Not everyone needs an API key. If you're going to use the API or use one of these tools, you'll need an API key and they'll explain how to get it. To use ChatGPT and to go through the rest of this class, you don't need an API key at all. But if you do get into using an API key, this is important to think about. And it's true for just about anywhere you use an API key. Most places are going to charge you for overuse. OpenAI does charge you for your API key use. I've been doing a ton with mine, and I'm up to about 7 cents this month, so it's not a lot. But if your API key gets out there and it gets used millions of times, you could end up with $100 charge 1 month before you realize. So just guard your API key whenever you have one from anywhere, really. Okay, so moving on, security and privacy we talked about a little bit. We touched on how to mitigate the concerns of what you put into a chatbot. These are some general rules, and you can kind of relate these rules to something like online forums or Twitter or discussions in the chat panel here in our class. All the same rules apply. Don't put your passwords in, don't put any secrets, any secret company policies or processes. Of course, your API keys, don't put any of that in a chatbot or just about anywhere online. Basically, the rule I go by is if I'm not going to put it out in a tweet or a Facebook post, then I'm not putting it in any of these places either. Okay, that's fairly self-explanatory, so we'll just move on from there and we'll dig into the fun stuff. Doing a time check, we're actually really good on time, but we'll spend a lot of time on prompts too, and a lot of time on the live prompts. good to see some more people joining in. I'm glad everyone's coming and hanging out with us today. Thanks for everyone who has joined, by the way. Okay, so on the pro prompts, starting with asking for what you really want. So I think of this in the way of how I talk to people, right? So it's a little bit different, of course, but ChatGPT is designed to use human-like interaction or human language processing. So instead of like in Google, you have to, if you search in Google and you want a top 10 list of programming languages, you might just type top 10 lists of programming languages 2023. You know, you're adding some kind of non-human language to the prompt, and it's clunky and weird. But in ChatGPT, you would say, I actually catch myself all the time putting please in my prompt, which is just a bit comical. But you would say something like, please give me the top 10 languages, top 10 computer languages in a list. And if you want it in a list, ask for it in a list. If you want a description of every language, ask for a description with it. So the asking for what you really want is really about making sure you have the right amount of detail in the prompt, and you're telling it more specifically, like if you were asking for an assistant and you didn't want to have to correct them or ask them to go back and make changes, ask for what you want the first time, and a lot of times you'll get it the first time. So if I wanted a list of the top 10 programming languages and I wanted a link to their official webpage, then I would say, give me the top 10 programming languages and include a link to each of their web pages and include a one-line description about each and put it in a table. So you can kind of guide those things that way. So the example I have here is if you want a 2-sentence tweet describing, my mouse does that all the time, it jumps around. If you want a 2-sentence tweet describing what AI is, ask for that instead of just what it. If you ask what is AI, you'll get paragraphs. Next is spending time on prompts. So I catch myself doing this wrong sometimes, and I have to remind myself. And really, the response that I get from ChatGPT is what reminds me. So I'll ask it for something and it doesn't come back with the right thing. And I realize I didn't spend enough time on the prompt. I was trying to be fast and get a response quickly. And instead now I'm prompting twice or 3 times or 4 times to get the full response that I want. And so instead of asking for, and this is kind of like the previous slide where we talked about, you know, instead of asking what is AI, and then your next prompt, you have to say, wow, that's a lot of information I'm not going to read. Can you please summarize that? And then it summarizes to 3 paragraphs. And then you have to give it a third prompt now and say, well, I really wanted to tweet this out and I don't want to rewrite it. Can you put it in a tweet format? Now you're in 3 prompts to get what you want. And instead, if you spend the time up front to think about what you really want and how you want to tell it what you want, so that you get it on the first try, you'll have a lot better time with ChatGPT and save a lot of time as well. A great example of that, by the way, is when you ask it for less mundane things than describe AI. When you ask it for something a little bit more advanced, like I would like you to write me a game, right? If you say write me a game, it's just going to get creative and it's going to write a game, and it's maybe you wanted a 2-person game and it's giving you a hangman game or something. It likes to default to that. So in that case, instead of saying write me a game, and maybe you don't want it in Python, maybe you want it in Python instead of JavaScript. It likes to do JavaScript. So it's better to say write me a game in Python. It needs a user interface. The user interface should be stylish. It should include unit tests because I want my code all tested. Separate all the concerns into different files. Like those are the kinds of things that you can say. And if you do all that up front, you'll get a much bigger response. but usually it's going to be closer to what you're looking for. Then we're going to talk about this slide, and then I'm going to pause in case there's questions, because this is an interesting topic here. And it seems like a good pause point. So I don't know if anyone else really uses this phrase, or how many people use this phrase for what I'm talking about here, but I call it session priming or prompt priming. And it's really the act of giving ChatGPT or Bard or whatever chatbot you're using some guidance, context, and additional learning, so that it gives you an answer more like what you're looking for. And there's some advanced prompt priming that you can do, and then there's some really basic stuff like one of the more basic ones would be like, you are an expert botanist, right? So giving it kind of a role of the kind of expectation of who you're talking to, right? So here you're saying you're an expert botanist. Please tell me the best advice for having healthy plants that require minimal effort. Or, you know, you're an expert botanist. Give me some tips for award-winning plants, instead of, you know, just some basic tips like make sure you water it every day, right? It's going to skip those tips. You can also prime it to think about how you are supposed to receive the information. And an example of that is, I am an expert botanist. I would like you to tell me any tips that I may not know, or things that have been learned in the last 5 years. And granted, ChatGPT only goes up to mid-2021, but you can say something like that and give it a better idea of what is useful to you to receive back as output. And that works really well for just skipping basics that you don't need it to give you information that you already have. So anyway, it helps ChatGPT determine its role in the conversation and your role, and a perspective around both. And then more advanced, you can teach it about things that it doesn't know. So it does only go up to September, I think, of 2021. In terms of the information it knows about the world and about technologies and anything else you're going to ask it. So in some cases, and I've run into this, you may have a good reason to want to teach it something new, something that the rest of the world knows about it. It's not proprietary to your company or a secret or trade secret, but that it just doesn't know about. And in that case, I'll give you an example that I like to use. Stable diffusion is a method for having a computer, an AI, generate images for you. And that also uses prompts, but the prompts for Stable Diffusion are much more complex and intricate than prompts for ChatGPT. But Stable Diffusion wasn't around in 2021, didn't exist yet. So I got to a point where I wanted ChatGPT to write prompts for me for Stable Diffusion. And I asked it, not thinking about the timelines, and it said, I don't even know what that is. And so I had to tell it. And so what I did is I used some session priming. I gave it probably 10 to 12 paragraphs and had a whole training session with ChatGPT. And it took time, but in the end, it had learned during that chat session the context of what Stable Diffusion was, what a prompt was, how to generate a prompt. For example, how to tell it I don't want these kind of things to show up in my image or characteristics, but I do want these kind of things, and how to do in Stable Diffusion, you have prompt weights, like token weights. So this keyword is more valuable to what you get back than another keyword. So if I said a puppy in clouds, if the puppy had a higher weight, it's going to be more prominent in the photo, in the image that it gives back. So teaching it how to do those things, I spent a good, I don't know, maybe an hour giving it a bunch of information, and then I would quiz it in little bits along the way and say, okay, now that I've told you about a prompt, can you give me an example of one? And it gave me an example, and then I said, well, that's pretty close. Let me tell you a little bit more about why that's wrong. And I went through a small training session. In the end, I had a chat session where I could say, give me a prompt for a fantastical sci-fi photo. It needs to be photorealistic. Otherwise, use your own creativity. And it gave me a really, really creative prompt that I would not have come up with on my own. Okay, so that is a long-winded example of a more advanced method for session priming. And then there's a bit on the slide as well about guiding output, which is another way to do some prompt priming. You can tell it, I want all my responses to be in this format or less verbose or whatever. Callie, you have your hand up.
Yeah, so we were doing something like this for a hackathon, and we were trying to tell ChatGPT that it was a lawyer and it should recommend if we take a case that they describe to it or we don't take a case. And by default, the AI is like, I'm not qualified to give legal advice, blah blah blah. Like it has a thing at the beginning like, oh, I can't give you legal advice because I'm not a lawyer. But it seemed like through priming, you could kind of jailbreak it quickly from what it's supposedly limited on. Do you have comments on why that is? Or
Yes, with some reservations. There's
okay.
yeah, there's absolutely and I see Samuel's hand up. We'll get you in 1 second. Yes, so ChatGPT has some built-in controls around not diving into some kind of darker areas of prompts that you could do. Like if you ask it to create a viral worm that will delete everyone's data on the internet, it's going to tell you no. It's not going to do that, right? So it has some things in place where it's going to do its best to not give you medical advice or legal advice or tell you what stocks to buy. Think of it in regards of if you are OpenAI, OpenAI's legal team, what are you going to ask the developers to jail to kind of block out from responses so that you don't get this pantsuit off you? And those are the kinds of things that it protects against. That said, you can jailbreak is a great term. You can jailbreak out of some of those controls with creative wording. If you have a good reason to do that, it's just a lot of times a matter of experimenting with the right wording to say, I'm not looking for medical advice, but instead of saying, what would you do if you had cancer or whatever, it's going to say like, go to the doctor and get a regimen or whatever, right? You would say, what have people traditionally done? Like that might be a different way of phrasing things so that it's giving you factual information instead of medical advice or legal advice or those kind of things. Samuel.
Thank you. I just had a question about if you're taking the time to, like you said, took an hour to teach it a new concept, does that new information persist for your account or for that session only, or how does that persist in the future, if at all?
That is a wonderful question. I'm actually learning more about that even just this week, trying to build something similar around ChatGPT and understanding how some of this works behind the scenes. And so what we're talking about is context. Chatbots generally don't have a whole lot of context, and in a single session you can retain some context. I'm not sure of the exact algorithm, how much context or how far back it retains context, But to kind of give you a peek behind the curtain of how it works, my understanding anyway, is that when you make a request and in a current chat session, it sends back to their API information about the chat that has already occurred in that session. So I use a different, and this is a tip for later on, I use a different session for just about everything I do, unless I'm doing some just quick questions that I'm going to throw away the session later. But for the example that I gave, I have a session that's saved, and I can go back to that session at any time. And if I make a new request and say, hey, generate a new prompt for me, it's going to feed the API, the generative AI, it's going to feed it back some of the previous conversation, even if it was a month ago. And now it has that context, and the new response that it gives me will happen with that context in mind. Now, that said, I don't know how far back the context goes, so I gave it a lot of training, and it did pretty well with it. But what I do, and I don't know how helpful it is I will occasionally tell it to go back to the beginning of our conversation and reiterate some of its training to make sure it has fresh context. I would assume if you have a chat session that is, 300 chats long, you may lose some of the beginning context. It's not going to send all of it back. So I do try and refresh the context, but it is per chat session. So if I wanted to get advice for a senior software engineer and get advice for a junior software engineer, I would do those in 2 different prompts. Otherwise, you have the risk of confusing it if you say, I'm a senior software engineer, tell me about this and this. And then in the same chat, you tell it you're a brand new engineer and you don't know anything about any code. Then it might get confused about that context. Does that answer
thank
your
you.
question? Okay. Another thing that excuse me. Another thing that I have in here about the context is you can set the temperature of a response, and I forgot to put that temperature on our on my list of terms. I'll add that a little bit later, but let me just describe what that is. So their API actually uses an input called temperature, and what temperature means is it's just kind of a scale of, I think, 0 to 1 or 2. I don't remember which, but in a chat you wouldn't use a 1 or a 2. But the temperature is in the API calls, you would give it a numerical temperature that is a representation of how creative it needs to be in its response. So with a temperature of 0, you're saying, go ahead and be pretty creative about your response. Just give me, I think it may be the other way around actually. I don't use it a ton in the API, but a temperature of 0, I think, is saying, yeah, it is the other way around. A 0 temperature is saying that you, as the generative AI, you're going to give me the responses, the best response every time. So if I ask you what ingredients go in a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, every time you're going to tell me peanut butter and jelly and bread. That I can pretty reliably get that response. I'll give you an example of how this works. So I use the API to ask it to generate fake news stories. Just as like a little experiment, I wanted it to, it created a whole website for me. I asked it to do this and built a workflow around it just to see if I can make it happen. And what ended up happening is it gave me a great story. And then the next time I asked it, by asking, I mean, I sent another API call to do it again. It gave me the exact same story, like almost word for word. I think it was word for word. And that was with the temperature of 0. And then I changed the temperature to 1 or to like the maximum. And the fake story that I got was completely just way off the rails. And it, I said, give me part of the prompt was, in the style of The Onion. So it knows what the Onion articles look like. And so with the highest temperature, it gave me something that was way far away from what I actually asked for. So then I dialed it back. I think I put the temperature to 0.5, and it was creative enough to get a new story every time, but still on point of what I asked for in the prompt. So in this case, you can prime with a temperature to say all I mean by a temperature here is if you're asking for example, if you say, tell me a joke, the temperature might be, use your own creative interpretation of what a joke is. It doesn't have to be the funniest thing in the world or whatever, right? So or if you say, tell me a story, you can set the temperature by saying, make the story as unique and creative as possible. Or you can say, the story can be something that I've heard before, whatever, I don't know. But that's kind of how temperature works. Not a whole lot of use for it, but I wanted to touch on it since I have it on the slide here. All right, so let's talk a little bit about getting better output. We're running a little bit ahead of schedule, so that's good because we'll get everything fit in. And I do have some bonus tips at the end, just in case we had extra time. So we've talked about generating better prompts, but there's a difference between better prompts and better output. Better prompts can give you a better response, but the output of that response can also be improved upon. And the most obvious thing is the verbosity. ChatGPT, and I just saw an article this morning, they added a feature and then they took it away. It's probably going to come back soon, I hope, where you can give it a default primer, like prompt priming. They call it pre-prompting or whatever. I don't remember how they phrased it, but it's a feature that they're adding that allows you to do some kind of prompt priming where you can have a setting that says, always be very brief in your responses. I'm a senior software engineer, so skip all the basics, those kind of things. You can put in a prompt primer that will exist for all your chats. But in the meantime, until that feature is rolled back out, one thing that you can do is you can say, in a single prompt or even ahead of time, because it retains some context, you can say, hey, I'm going to ask you to describe these events in history, and I want the response to be brief. And this is, again, where you can make better use of your wording. Here, I wrote verbose or brief. Those are objective words. So verbose to you may be different from verbose to me, and same with brief. So when you prompt, you want to use more specific terminology to get exactly what you want. So instead of verbose, I might say, tell me about the War of 1812 and give me this explanation in 4 paragraphs or 20 paragraphs or book form. Or instead of brief, I would say, tell me about the war of 1812 in less than 50 words, less than 20 words. You could ask it to describe an apple in 1 word, and it'll usually say red. But so that's the way you would want to handle that. If I touch my mouse at all, it goes to the next slide. I just got to keep away from it. So that's one thing that you can do to guide your format, your response format, and it's probably one of the most common things I do when I ask it for anything that's going to return a bunch of text for. Even with code, sometimes it's useful to get 4 paragraphs about what the code's doing. Sometimes it's not, and you can guide code in that way too. If you say, write me a game of Hangman in JavaScript, HTML, and CSS, and a bunch of other words in the prompt that I'm not going to go into right now for brevity, but as part of your prompt, you can say, I'm a new engineer and I don't know JavaScript. For any of the JavaScript, please add comments above each line explaining what it does. And it'll do that for you. Or you can say, I don't need any explanation, just give me the code, and it'll just give you code. So you can tell exactly what you want and save yourself some time. What is also important is if you do use the API, so let's say you're building software to automate a process, and when you use the API, like I said, it costs almost no money to use the API just for yourself. But if you're building out something that's going to be consumed and have to scale, the verbosity here makes a big difference. ChatGPT uses what's called tokens to figure out how much it's going to charge you. And so you get charged per token. It's very like fractions of a penny. But you know, if a request costs me a request and response, if I can take that from 100 tokens down to 50 tokens, then when I have 1 million users, that's going to save me a significant amount of money on my bill every month. So it's those kind of things just to be aware of. And when you're talking about ChatGPT and using it manually, it saves you a lot of time in reading. You don't have to skip over all the comments. Now that I'm thinking about it, like when I ask it to write me code, it puts comments in the code all the time and I go delete them. And I'm just now thinking about, why don't I just tell it, don't put comments in my code? So, you know, we all learn as we go. And you can ask for, speaking of code, you can ask for in a specific language, for example. So a lot of times it's, if you say, write me a game, it's going to give you either Python or JavaScript. There is some documentation there about what languages it likes the most, or knows the most, rather. Go ahead, Kelly.
We had a musing from Lisa. I wonder how the responses would be if I asked history with specifics such as minority women in the war of XYZ.
That's a great question. Thanks for catching that. If I pull up chat, then I can't navigate through my slides and vice versa. I'll have to figure that out. But yeah, so it's a great question. It also leads into something else that I think is on a future slide. ChatGPT sometimes makes things up, or as I call it, does some day drinking. So ChatGPT will do a pretty good job a lot of the time about giving you information that is true and real. And sometimes it just makes things up. And there are ways that you can get around that. And by get around it, I mean get more trusted information back from it. The thing that I do probably the most, especially with things like that, where it has a little more room to make it up. If you ask it for a joke or anything creative, it's supposed to be creative. You don't have to worry about it. If you ask it for code, the code's going to work or it won't. Probably don't have to worry about it too much there. When you're asking about facts and history, I always ask it to cite resources. And you might as well just put it right in the prompt. So I don't remember the exact phrase, but if you asked it for, you know, give me as much detailed history as you can about women in the First World War and their role or whatever, then you would maybe add to the prompt your verbosity that you want, unless you just want it to default to giving you a ton of information. And you would ask it to cite those resources. So like you would add to your prompt, in your response, also cite resources with links wherever possible. That's what I would add. So I don't think that answers the original question, which is what kind of response would it give you? I think it is trained on millions and millions of documents from the internet and human interaction, validating the types of answers it gets. I would assume that you would get some pretty interesting answers, probably mostly factual. but with that kind of warning about, make sure if you're going to use the information for anything outside of your own head, or even if you're just trying to get information for yourself, like, it's always good to ask it to cite the resources. And I ask for links when I ask it to cite resources, because, don't quote me on this, I think I had heard at one point someone asked for it to cite resources and it made up the citations too. So so that's just to say, ask it for the links and then follow the links and just go look at and make sure the resources are legit. It's a great learning tool for stuff like history and facts. It's good to use it more as a tool to point you in the quickest way to the information you're after, so you can go validate it yourself, rather than taking what it responds with at face value. I hope that helps. If you're going to use it for any research like that, definitely need to do that. There was a story about an attorney that used it for like closing arguments or something, and he got laughed out of court because some of what was in the closing arguments he got from ChatGPT was not factual, and he got laughed out of court and maybe sanctioned. I don't know what else happened, but it's not a good scene. You don't want to be in that position when you're telling people this is truthful information and it may not be. So ask for it to cite sources, follow those links. And that's another tip here too, is like, so you can ask it for, the bottom half of the slide, specific programming language. You can ask it for the response in a table. I mentioned in one of the examples before, or in Markdown. So I'm doing documentation for something related to some programming languages. I think it was related to software licenses, right? You go on GitHub, and if you use a library on GitHub, it has some of them have different software licenses. Some say that you cannot include it in a commercial product. Some you can. So I asked it to give me a list of all the software licenses with a one-line description about what each is, and I told it to put it in a table and link to them. And it created a Markdown table, and I took that Markdown and was able to put it right in my documentation. You can ask it for something like a bulleted list. You can tell it to give you the first line of work by Shakespeare and return it to you in Pig Latin. It'll do it. I don't know how useful that is, but you can format the response in a way that is most useful to you for whatever your application is for that response. And there's probably, I think we have more examples later where another great example is like, I want this list, but I want it in JSON. Or I'm going to use this list in a Python project. So give me this list, but give it back to me in as a Python array. I did that last night. I asked it for a list in a Python array, and it gave it right back. So this is a very wordy slide. This is not good slide form, but I'll try and just describe it a little bit.
Joe, we have another question
Oh,
related to the lawyer. The lawyers did ask ChatGPT to cite sources, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I think I'm trying to remember the story, and I don't want to give misinformation, but I think I remember just the attorney had just taken it kind of at face value, but I don't know. And maybe nobody knows except for the attorney if they asked for sources. But that's why I say too, like, ask it to cite the sources with links, and then follow the links, and then use your judgment there on how much you trust that information. There is no replacement for doing some work yourself. You have to do a little bit. Even when it's writing code, you have to look at the code and make sure this code takes input as from a user form. Am I sanitizing that input? Am I making sure that there's no security holes in it? These are things that you have to do sometimes on your own. ChatGPT sometimes does a better job than I do about thinking about some of those concerns, like, oh, we need to catch errors. Maybe I don't think about that when I'm just proofing out a concept, and ChatGPT does. But you should look through the code. And also, if you're asking it to write code because you don't know a lot about JavaScript, it's a great way to learn the JavaScript. Like I said, you can say, or Python or whatever, you can say, add a comment to each line about what it does, and then just take a few minutes and read through it and learn something new. That's it. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that attorney asked for sources to be cited, but if they did, I'm gonna doubt that they went and reviewed those sources, because otherwise we probably wouldn't have heard about it as a story. Okay. Thanks for the questions, by the way. I love these questions. Lots of good discussion around them. And, you know, if you're thinking it, someone else probably is too. Okay, so another way that I get better output is I kind of micromanage the output. I make sure sometimes ChatGPT does a really good job of handling the format. Like if I ask it how to write a website, it's going to give me a list, a numbered list of the steps that I need to go through. But occasionally I'll ask it, I'll say, write a simple game. And if I do a kind of dumb prompt like that, it may write a game for me. It may tell me how to write a game. Like instead of giving me any code back at all, it may say, here's what you need to do, learn JavaScript, you know, and then come up with a game idea and all those things. If you micromanage the output and build a better prompt, then you'll get much better results. And so one example is prompt splitting. So I would say, for bigger tasks, I might say, tell me all the steps to build a marketplace website with user login and an admin panel. And then in my prompt, I would say, then walk me through each step one at a time, providing all of the code. And so what it'll do then is it'll give you all the steps, and it'll say, here's what you do in step 1. And then you do it and you say, okay, let's proceed to step 2. So this is kind of a way of priming with prompt splitting, where you're telling it to do that. Another example here is, write a game of Hangman in JavaScript, but separate the CSS and HTML, or you can say separate the concerns if you want, into their own files. A lot of time, if you say, write me a game in HTML and CSS, it'll put it all in one file. Usually it's better for them to have them in separate files. And when you're asking it for changes or making your own changes later, it's just easier to work with. So, oh, and I actually have an example here where I say, add comments to the files explaining what each line of code does. So you can be a little bit more explicit about what you want, and it'll guide it in a better way for you. Another example, and I actually was writing this the other day, and I thought, hey, that would actually be fun to try if I have the time to do it one day. Create my biography. First, I'll give you a list of you'll give me a list of topics that might work in a biography, and I'll select several. So you're priming it by saying, I don't really know what I would talk about in my biography. You're going to give me a large amount of things to select from, and then I'll select them, and then we'll move forward from there. And then in the prompt continues. Then for each, you'll ask me relative questions designed to form content a reader would like. Finally, you'll organize all the information to write a riveting but truthful book about my life. And you have to add things like but truthful, or it'll make up stories. Callie.
Could you ask, is there like a limit to the amount of content? Like, could I ask it to write me a 200-page book, or would it say, hey, listen, I can't give everything away for that?
I don't know, but that's where the jailbreaking comes in, right? So, and that's also where prompt splitting comes in. And I don't think I want the response in 200 pages, and here's why. And that's a real good point, right? Like if I say, write me a book, what I might add to this prompt is we're going to write one chapter at a time. And that kind of gets around that. Like just that small sentence goes a long way. Because if I said, and I do this a lot, if I said, give me a list of 100 blah, blah, blah in HTML, right? It's going to do one of two things. And sometimes I fight with ChatGPT and I have to learn to be nice to it. But for example, I said, you guys will see it later. I said, give me a thing and draw 100 stars in it. It's a space image. I don't want to say any more about it until we see it. It's not that great, don't worry. If I said, draw me a space image and give me 100 stars, draw 100 stars in it. It'll give you the HTML for 4 of them. And then it has a comment in the HTML, add more stars as needed. So I fight with that all the time with ChatGPT, where if it's something super repetitive, part of the point of ChatGPT is to get it to do repetitive things for me, but it's smarter than me sometimes, and it says, nah, I don't want to do all your work, and it makes me do it. So sometimes you have to be very explicit and say, it's very important that you write all of the HTML for all 100 stars for me, and that when the code is done, that you give back to me that I do not have to do any work to have 100 stars in the completed project. Like sometimes you have to add some extra dumbing down for ChatGPT to really get that you want what you want. But in the case, I'm kind of going off track here. So in a case like that, where it's like, okay, I'm giving you 100 stars back, it generates so much of the code. And then when it hits a token limit, remember we talked about tokens being how it kind of figures out how to charge you. It uses tokens to determine how big the response is too, or when it cuts it off. So at a certain word limit, let's say, it'll just cut the response off right in the middle. So, excuse me. So you'll have code that it generated for you, and it'll cut it off right in the middle of a line of code. But then it has a button, continue generating response. And I don't think there's a way to say just generate all the response all at once. Don't make me say continue, because then you're kind of trying to guide itself around the interface, which it doesn't really do. But you can say, let's do this in pieces. Give me one paragraph, and then after that, I'll ask you for the second paragraph, which is good too, because the way I would word it here is I would say, we'll do this one paragraph at a time. After you give me the first paragraph, I will review it and ask for changes. And then when I'm done with changes, I will tell you to proceed to the next paragraph. And so it has this preconceived notion of how your workflow is going to go together. So you're forming a contract with the chatbot of how you're going to work together. But that's how I would do it. For something enormous, it's not just about how it handles the large response. It's also about how you're going to handle it. So I would just split it up, make it easier for myself and for the chatbot. So I'm going to try that at some point. I'm going to make it create a biography, see what it comes up with. And then I'll have to do some kind of algorithm on how much of it is truthful. Maybe I'll report back somewhere on that. Okay, so the other thing is spot checking and following up. We touched on this a little bit. We talked about like the stable diffusion example, right? Where I told it, here's how to create a prompt, here's how to do negative prompt, here's how to do weighting in the prompt, to put the weight of a puppy in the prompt higher than the clouds to make it more prominent. Now that I've told you all this information, please give me an example, or please describe a prompt to me, right? That's a very valuable thing when you teach it something complex, is then you can ask it, because especially if you're not a teacher or you're explaining it all the time, you may not explain it very concisely. You can ask it when you're done, give me a brief and concise explanation of all the things that I just taught you. And what it returns to you. If it doesn't make sense or it seems a little off, then you have a little bit more, priming to go. And that's why you do the spot checks, to make sure. The more time you put on up front, the less you have to put in later. And then there's also follow-up, right? Like, it's a great tool, and sometimes it's easy to say, give me a list of whatever, and then you just take that list and you're like, well, that's great, it did a thing for me. And then you go take that list, and now you're on your own putting that list in HTML, or thinking about ways to add to the list or whatever. Instead, you can use ChatGPT and just ask it follow-up questions. If you ask for the top 10 programming languages and it gives you back the top 10, and you're like, wow, I didn't know Python was at the top, or whatever. Then you can say, can you tell me what the top 10 list is based on? Is it based upon usage, or people's opinions, or the age of the language, or what is it based on? Like, so ask follow-up questions and you get more useful information out of it. And then the thing that we talked about before, of course, whenever you're dealing with facts or statistics, it's not just like historical facts, but if you're saying how tall are the top, the 5 tallest buildings in the world, it's pretty really good chance that you're going to get factual information out of a question like that. But I go look anyway. And we'll see an example of that too, where when I was coming up with the example, I actually went out and looked on the web, and I could have asked it for citations so I could look it up, but I just spot checked a couple and said, all right, how tall is this actual building? And it checked out. So yeah, always do your spot checks and follow-ups, and you get more out of it that way too. Okay. So yeah, it's right after 11 Eastern. Seems like a good time to start practicing. Does everyone have ChatGPT an account set up and opened in your browser? Actually, what I should say is, does anyone not have it? Please raise your hand with the raise your hand tool in Zoom, so we know and we can wait a minute. If not, we'll move on. Okay. So we'll practice with some prompts. Let's get started. So I have a larger list of prompts, and I'll get to those in a second, but here's some that just to start with. And I'm actually gonna copy these. Can I copy it? Let me copy these real quick and put them in chat so that you can just copy and paste if you want, rather than trying to type them all in. Thanks, Callie, for keeping up with the chat, by the way.
I had another question.
Sure.
Can I set the temperature from the UI instead of the API?
So the way the API does it is with a numerical setting, and it tells the API how to be more creative or not creative. I think that you would be able to do it, but you have to do it with words, because it's the chatbot interface, the ChatGPT web interface, is really just a human language interpreter. So it interprets the human language, and then from that, it determines how it's going to respond to you. I don't think there is a setting yet, but I would foresee that there is going to be one. I know that it's a work in progress. ChatGPT is something that they're continually upgrading and adding features to. So it would not surprise me if there's not one that I've missed already, that it should show up soon. I'm going to copy this other second prompt in here too, but I'm curious in chat what your response is. If your response I mean, you don't have to paste the whole response, but like the botanist one, if you type that in a session, in a chat session, I'm curious what the 3 household plants are that you get back, and if our responses are all the same. I'm gonna type it in. I'm gonna put this prompt in right now and see what I get back. Do a new chat. By the way, when you do a new chat, there's an option for GPT-4 if you have a paid account. I'm using GPT 3.5 for everything because I want everyone to be able to use a free account to test things out with. GPT-4 is just supposed to be more advanced. In most cases, 3.5 should get you some pretty good results. So let's see, we have spider plant, Boston fern, money plant. And I got spider plant, money plant, and Areca palm. Areca palm. So I got some slightly different answers. And the question though is not saying like the top 3 plants. It suggests 3 that are low maintenance. So it tracks that we would get some slightly different answers potentially. Thanks, Varun. So we got spider plant, Boston fern, money plant. We got Kelly got a spider plant, Areca. So you got the Areca palm and Boston fern. Okay. Yeah, so we get some pretty similar answers, which kind of makes sense if these are, what it's doing is it's drawing on its knowledge from all of the information that's been around the internet. And there's probably tons of blog articles, and many of them probably copy from each other too, where they talk about plants that are, or forums where they talk about, you know, what are plants that are easy to care for, household plants. And these are probably the ones the most talked about, these 3 or 4. So it makes sense that these would show up in the response. I am going to use the same session for all my requests because I'm not doing any big priming or anything on this, but let's get the next question. We'll put this in. This is a little bit longer response. And this one I've actually used before and turned out to be pretty handy. I would say though, like, so this prompt is using commonly found ingredients. Give me 2 meal prep recipes. So I'm being very explicit that I want 2 and that I want commonly found ingredients. They each make 5 servings. If you don't tell how many servings, it's just going to come up with a number. Are healthy. That's important to me. So I want it to be a healthy meal. And are quick and easy to make. That's also super important. If it's not quick and easy to make, I'm not doing it, probably. I'm too busy and I'll put it off. And then I go further to say, include the ingredients list, which it was probably going to do anyway. Steps to prepare, which it probably was going to do anyway. Prep time, which it probably was not going to include, but is important to me. And estimated nutritional information per serving. So I say estimated because if I don't say the word estimated, it's going to give me some response about having a hard time telling me for sure the nutritional value, and then it may vary and all these things. Let's skip all that and just say estimated because that's all I care about. And I've used this in the past, which is a really good way to come up with some recipes without having to search through 400 pages where they say it'll take 10 minutes and it takes me an hour every time it takes me an hour when they say
Are they good recipes? Like, has it ever done something silly like mix chocolate and chicken together and then?
No, it's the recipes it gave me were pretty good. I made them and ate on them for a week. And they were pretty standard ingredients. The other thing that I don't like about a lot of recipes online is it's like fresh chopped parsley. I'm not fresh chopping parsley if I'm doing quick meal prep. Let's just be honest. So, you know, those kind of things, like that's why I say readily available ingredients, and I don't want to have to go search for which store near me has some obscure ingredient. So this does a pretty good job for me. I saw some responses in chat. We got a 1-pan baked chicken with vegetables, quinoa salad with chickpeas and Mediterranean. That seems involved. Hopefully that's not too many steps. There you go. Yeah. See exactly what I'm talking about, Lisa. Like, think about how you can improve the prompt for what you specifically want. So if you want gluten-free, just say it right on the prompt and you'll save a whole lot of time. Good call out. Baked lemon herb chicken with roasted vegetables. I'm getting hungry now. And you'll probably find a lot of things with like rice or quinoa. There's a lot of meal prep ideas with those. And you can specifically, like, if you hate quinoa, just say, make sure my ingredient doesn't, none of these ingredients should include quinoa, or I'm allergic to shrimp, or gluten-free, or any of those kind of modifiers. You can add 2 words, gluten-free, to the prompt, and it'll change everything for you. Another step you can do here, and you can do it right in the original prompt. I'm just going to try it here and see what I get. We'll just experiment live and see what happens. First of all, I often tell it thank you. I feel like the algorithm behind this reads the word thanks and gives some weight to how good the response was, so that future iterations of me asking this question will just get better and better. Also, it's just polite for when the robot overlords take over. They'll remember me. So anyway, just to go a step further with this, before we go to the next prompt, I'm going to ask it to, and I could have done this in the original prompt, but I'm just going to do it here as an afterthought. Give me these recipes as HTML web pages. Format them to fit on 1 page each. Let's just see what I get with that. So we'll ask it to give it back in a format that gives us. So here's recipe 1. It's going to put it in its own HTML. Cool. This one's going to be chickpea and vegetable quinoa bowl. Okay. And there's recipe 2. So already I have recipe 1. Let's just see what it looks like. What I'm thinking about is, what if I want to print these out, right? I don't want to just copy all this text and put it in a text editor. So instead, I'm gonna, I actually have this little tool that I created. I'm not gonna lie, I didn't create it. ChatGPT created it. I just told it what to create. That generates this code for me. So let's put it in our demo folder. Oops. There's a slight bug in it. Let's name it an HTML file. It's supposed to name it for me, but I'm going to tell it to call it recipe1.html. Yes, use HTML. Okay, so I have this. This is just a tool that I created to save the code as a file. You can just copy it and save it locally. But I'm going to open.
Is that open source? What if I want to use your tool?
It's not open sourced yet. It's a browser extension, so it's more useful if I publish it as an extension for anyone to download for free. I just haven't had time this month to do it. And obviously I have a bug in it, so I have to work that out. But yeah, this is how it returns it in a page that I could print. So in theory, if I say print, I wonder what that would look like. Yeah, it's going to fit on 1 page. Perfect. So that's just another way you can add to the prompt to say, give me something more in line with what will work out for how I'm going to use it. And you can put that in the original prompt. Say, when you ask for the recipe, say, by the way, give me each recipe in its own HTML page. It should fit on 1 page and be printable. I didn't have to say printable because I told it to fit on 1 page, and it kind of just did a good job. If it's a longer recipe, you may say, I want it to print on 1 to 2 pages. So, all right, let's go on to the next example. That was fun. Let's go to this one. This is a slightly larger one. So this one is using HTML. I'm gonna paste this in here and then I'll read it so you'll have a moment to copy it. This is a very verbose one, and this is not my longest prompt by a long shot. So I'll just read it out. Essentially, what I'm looking for is just for fun. I want a representation of what our solar system kind of looks like in terms of planet sizes, and a little bit of information like for, I want to learn as I go here. So I'm going to ask it for using HTML and CSS in a single file. I say single file just because it's easier for me to play with for what I'm doing here, just experimenting. Make a page with a black background, add the sun at the top, followed by all the planets in order of their distance from the sun. Each planet should be colored representative of its real known colors and sized relative to the drawn sun according to the known sizes. This is kind of tricky wording, so could be hit or miss. And it's really about kind of practicing how to word things sometimes. When the user mouses over the sun or any planet, a 25% transparent black modal, I'm getting very descriptive because I'm just thinking about how I want it to display, will appear partially over the sun or planet with the name in large bold font, followed by information about its size and distance from the sun. Yeah, partially transparent pop-up. It won't go away unless clicked. Yeah, you can absolutely. That's a great call, Ted. You can absolutely add details like that. Like, be very specific about what you want. When you think about those things ahead of time before you get your first response, you save a lot of time going back and telling it to change the code to do other things. That's not to say that you can't go back. If you don't get what you want the first try, tell it what you want to change. And I did that a few times with this. I will say this prompt did not give me the example that I'm going to show you. I made a couple of changes in iterations to get the exact thing I wanted. I had ChatGPT build a page of prompts for me, and I'll share that a little bit later. But here's the prompt that I asked it for. Here's what it gave me after a few iterations. Like, I eventually asked it for a bunch of stars, and then I had to fight with it and tell it to do all the stars for me and not tell me how to do it. But this is what I got back. Excuse me. There's some things that I would change here. Like, if I were going to create this prompt from scratch again, I would say, make sure the modal appears in the topmost layer, or if I'm using technical terms, make sure the modal has the highest Z index so it doesn't get hidden behind anything else. But this is what it came back with. There's Earth. It has the distance from the sun and all that. So it's kind of interesting to see what you get back out of it. Maybe a little bit different. Yeah, and I think at one point it got creative and it made the modal for the sun was spinning counterclockwise. And I thought that was kind of cool at first, and I asked it to do it for all of them, and it looked horrible, so I backtracked. But yeah, sometimes it takes a little bit of creative liberties with what it's displaying, and it thinks, well, it's a solar system, something should be spinning. It did that for me too. It's very interesting what it comes up with sometimes. Okay, so the question is, what did you paste the code to display it? So what I did, I have a tool that saves it to a file, and that's how I did it. But the other way to do it is to open up a text editor or a development environment like Visual Studio Code is a good one. Whatever you use to work with code, you can do it in, there are web pages too, like JS Fiddle, if you're just testing out JavaScript. Do a search on Google for JS Fiddle, spelled just like fiddle, but all one word, JS Fiddle. I think there's probably an HTML Fiddle too. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, you can save it and open it in Chrome. Put in Visual Studio Code, try one of these online fiddle things like JS Fiddle. There's different sources for those kind of things if you don't want to save it locally. Those are a decent idea for trying out code that you didn't write yourself too, because they already have protections that keep it from doing nasty things. And if you put code on your own computer, you have to look at it first and make sure that it's not doing anything crazy. Most everything from ChatGPT won't. I don't expect what you get back to look like what I have here, because I had some additional prompts that I fed into it. But if I put this prompt into, we'll just see what I get back. So if I put this prompt into ChatGPT, and I'm not going to modify it at all, I'll just put what we have in here, what I pasted in chat. Yeah, JS Fiddle is nice. So the benefit here is I told it to put it all into one file. So now I just have one file to deal with. Now this one doesn't have the 100 stars in it, so if it did, you would have another button next to stop generating, or there's a regenerate button at the end. Yeah. You would have another button here that says continue generating. If it has too much code to return. In this case, we have two planets and a sun. So it's not going to do what I wanted. Already I can see that I need to modify it. Here's where it's doing this thing where it wants me to do work, and I don't want to do work. So instead of copying the code like right here, for example, I would just say, please add all of the planets for me. And I will go a little further to say the code you return should include everything I asked for, and should not require additional steps by me. So now I'm telling it, look, you did okay, but this is not acceptable. I asked you for everything and you gave me part of everything. So yeah, and it may put the planets out of order, but it also may put the planets in the HTML may not be representative of where they exist on the page, because it'll depending on what you get back, the planets may get put in different places. But yeah, you do have to kind of spot check it, like I said on some of the other topics. You have to spot check it and see, is it giving you back, like, if Earth is 3 times the size of the sun in what it gives you back, then maybe that's not representative of what you're actually looking for. So you have to double check those things. Get a demo. I'm going to save this as planets.html.
Can I ask a question, Joe?
Yeah, absolutely.
So the response I got was kind of like this one. It completely misunderstood what I meant by a modal, and the planets are out of order. So it really doesn't have a lot that I would want to keep. So if you were in that situation, would you just ask it to regenerate? Would you make a new prompt, or would you start a new chat session? Like, how would you move forward if it gave you something that you're like, oh, this is totally unusable?
Yeah, really good question. I have found most of the time it's better there's a few approaches, right? So a new chat session, if you get way off base and now you're afraid that it has some context that is going to throw it off. For example, if this is bleeding in some things from my recipe prompt for some reason, or in my recipe prompt I said, let's say in my recipe prompt I said, I like the color scheme blue and red, and the planet images that came back has a lot of blue and red or something, then that might be a good reason to go to a completely different session where I would just copy my prompt, go to a whole new chat session and start over. In the case of something like this, there is a distinction between me saying, do it all again, like this, and me saying, going back up to the top and editing my original prompt. And there's a reason to do it one way versus the other. So here, if it did it wrong, I almost always will tell it what to correct and let it be a whole new prompt in the same chat session. And the reason for that is twofold. One is it helps me retain some knowledge about how I might prompt it better in the future. What is it going to fail on a lot of times? But the second reason is when I say, when I have to ask it to generate all this code for me again, this cost OpenAI money for them to generate a second response. So somewhere behind the scenes, I'm putting serious money on the idea that they have in their algorithm something that looks at how many times they have to respond. And when I say something is wrong, and they use that information to improve their response. So hopefully in the future, we won't see, if enough people are telling it, no, do this for me, this is not acceptable. Hopefully in the future, we'll see this happen less and less. However, there is also something to be said for using the interactions here where we say, so here was my first response. If I give it a thumbs down, it's going to ask me what was wrong. And I can tell it did not generate all the code on the first try. And someone's going to look at these responses. And I'm not going to check any of these because it's not harmful or unsafe. It's not untrue. You can do that too if you ask it for facts and they're not true. Or if it was just a horrible response in general, you can say not helpful. And here I just want to say, look, it didn't do exactly what I wanted. And it actually will give you a second response. So there's another way to do that there, where you can get a second response. So here's the original answer that I didn't like. Here's the new answer. And if I just look through this new answer, I can see that I've got all my planets now. But what is this? Use JavaScript to handle modal. So this is already wrong too, right? So in this case, you can go back again and say, there's an option here for neither answer, I believe. Neither answer is better, and it's going to try and generate another answer. And you can kind of iterate through the workflow like that. The other way to do it, let me get to my most recent one. So if I were to go back, I can go back here and modify my original prompt with this edit prompt button. And in doing so, I'm changing. So I'll click anywhere in here and I can say, please be sure to provide all. I'm trying to show you how to do things that are not, yeah. I want to copy this and just paste it up here. I'm trying to show you how to do things more efficiently. And so why would I retype this? Okay. So here I'll say, and I'll just modify this. The code you should, no, I don't need to modify it. Code you return should include everything. So now I'm just adding to my original prompt. And I'm going to regenerate a whole new response. So everything that I did before is gone. And it's going to generate a new response for me that hopefully will be correct. So this is, the kind of third way to do it. And a lot of times this is what I go for a couple of reasons. One, it gives me a better example of what my prompts should look like. So when I'm going back and kind of looking at how do I want to improve my prompts, But number two, it keeps my chat session cleaner. So when I'm going back and looking for the code it generated, I just have this one block of code now that has everything I need. So this is what this one has, our JavaScript in it. It has all our planets. I'm going to save this and see what it looks like. So I need to click my thing. There we go. So let's save this. I don't know why I got to keep my folder. Anyway, we call this planets. Planets.html. Yes, I want to replace it. Okay, so now I've got a new planets HTML. I'm going to open it up. It's a little different. Saturn is oblong, so it does generate a different response, and that's the other thing to keep in mind. If you change your original prompt, instead of it updating its code, it's generating a whole new set of code, which may be different. So something to keep in mind. It looks like it did a fair job in the colors. Earth is blue and Mars is red. The modal is not semi-transparent, so there's some fails there. The distances, again, you know, if you're going to use this and share it with anyone, you might go search Google for Earth's distance from the sun, you know, and see, just spot check those numbers. I'm not going to do it here because we are getting a little bit in time. I want to move on to some other examples. Okay, so let's move on. Those are the prompts that I have in here, but like I said, I had some additional prompts. I'm just going to go through these pretty quickly. So here's our original prompts that we went through: the botanist one, the ingredients one, the sun and planets one. I have another prompt here that, you know, if you're doing web design, could be useful. Of course, there's probably a billion pages that already have this, but I just wanted to see how it would do. So I asked it to create a page with 256 colors. Instead of copying these prompts, I'm going to share this. I create a page on GitHub with these prompts if you want to take a look and follow along and save bookmark it for later. I'll just show you what these prompts look like. So this one's essentially, I'm asking for all 256 colors. I'm defining that they should be in rectangles and sized appropriately so that they fill the page. I'll be honest, I had to write this prompt 3 or 4 times to get it right because I had some struggles with it. I gave it an example. Sometimes it's useful to give an example. Sometimes the example makes it, for example, in this case, the first time I ran this, the example made every square exactly 60 by 52, regardless of the size of my browser. So it took the example as literal and kind of failed at what I wanted there. But I specify I want a border around it and that I want a modal on it so I can see the color values and copy them and that kind of thing. So let's take a look at what I got back eventually from that. Looks like this. As you can see, there's no modal. There's no modal happening. I got a mouse over cursor, but no modal. So there's going to definitely be times where when you ask it for code, it's going to take 3 or 4 prompts. It's not always going to happen on the first try. So that's that example. I'm not going to get deep into that. I have a few more prompt examples that I'll just mention here and maybe talk about what's different about them. Give me the top 10 computer languages. We talked about this one. In this one, I say display it in a 2-column table. The top row of the table should span, I'm going to increase this a little. The top row of the table should span both columns and say top 10 languages. Show the table and also return the markdown to display it. So if I want that, I'm going to jump to the bottom here and just see what that returns. So in this case, it returns a table for me. This is wrong because I only have 5 of the 10 languages. But if I want it in actual markdown, which is what my ultimate goal was, in this case, I wouldn't redo the prompt because it turned out what I wanted. But I might say, put the top 5 in the left column and the bottom 5 in the right column. And see what I get in terms of response there. So sometimes it's handy to kind of adjust the response in that way to make sure you're getting exactly what you want. So in this case, it's a little off again. It gave us 6 in one column and 4 in the other. So you may have to tweak your responses a little bit to get what you want. These are great examples of where, in this case, I might give it a thumbs down just because the displayed table is wrong. In this case, I would absolutely give it a thumbs down because it showed 6 on one side and didn't do it in the displayed table, and the markdown is also wrong. So, but that's an example of a way you could prompt to get the style of output that you want. So the next example, I could say, give me that list in JSON, right? So what if I realized after the fact I want it in JSON? You don't have to rewrite the whole prompt. Just say I want it in JSON. And this it does usually a pretty good job at. I could double check the order here and just kind of spot check Java, C, C++. But this gives me the order, the list back in JSON, so I don't have to do that on my own. Imagine you get this list back and then you copy it and then you manually format it into JSON. Seems like kind of a waste of time to do that. And then I mentioned this one before. You could say, I'll just show you how it works. Say, give me that list in Python, in a Python array. And you could use other languages too. If it knows enough about the language, it can do a pretty good job of formatting it however you specify. So those are handy ways of just saving you a little extra time so you don't have to do that manually. This is all about this tool doing the work for you, so you have to do as little as possible. This one I did just for fun, just to kind of show you can be a little creative with it and get it to do other things. So we'll say, for example, take every word of this prompt and return it as an item in an array where each item includes a word, the word's length, its meaning, and the word in Pig Latin. And it did a pretty good job before. Hopefully it will again. So yeah, it take every word of this prompt, right? Gives me the word length, 4 or 5. It looks like it's pretty spot on those. Gives me the meaning of the word to get into one's possession or control. And then the Pig Latin, ecte, every A. So gave me what I'm looking for. It's taken a little bit of time to do it, but while it's working on that, we'll go back and look at the last prompt that I have an example here. Using CSS and HTML in the same file, draw the top 10 tallest buildings in the world in order of height from left to right. The bottoms of the buildings should line up. I had some struggles with this, getting the bottoms of the buildings to line up. And honestly, some of it was, this is really a good point too, because sometimes what it gives you back is so close that it takes more time to tell it how to fix it than it would take for you to just fix it. So for example, if it gave you back a planet list and Earth was the last planet in the list, and to fix the problem, you just need to move Earth up in the list, it's much faster for you to just do that than tell it what to do. So you have to kind of pick your battles there. But this is eventually what I ended up with after a little bit of back and forth with ChatGPT. It gives me all the buildings, and I did spot check a couple of these. I realized, interestingly, that the World Trade Center is 1,776 feet tall. And I spot checked that because I was like, did it make that up? I wonder, is that on purpose? So I don't know. I didn't read up on that, but so this is what it gave me back after a little bit of fiddling around with it. So that's our prompts. we're getting a little low on time, so I won't dig in too much to those, and we'll move on. I did add some resources here, so let's make this full screen again. Okay, we'll go back. Okay, so here's our resources. I just added a couple of links in here. One is the learn a little bit more about what ChatGPT is and kind of how it works in terms of getting a little bit more under the covers and learning a little bit more about the API. So I did a talk earlier this year at Hacking with the Homies conference. It's an hour-long talk, and it's available on YouTube at this link. I will share this link in chat. Let me get back to it real quick. I'll share both of these links in chat. So here's the link to the talk if you want to watch me talk in a monotone voice most of the hour about ChatGPT. And it has some useful information about how it works and a little bit more about how the API works and some examples of building a game using the API, including building an image. There is an image prompt in the API that you can use to build some kind of basic images. So I used a couple of tools in the API to generate an image and all the code to make a game work, and how I iterated through that and how it looked crazy the first time I did it, and those kind of things. And then this other one is a very basic ChatGPT cheat sheet, which I had ChatGPT create for me. So these aren't my favorite colors. It's just what ChatGPT came up with because I told it to make it fun. And so this is hosted also on my my GitHub. If you want to look at that, I will update that at some point. I just didn't have time before this class. So getting back into this here, those are the couple of resources if you want to take a look at those. And then we can get into some of the terms around ChatGPT and the ChatGPT space in AI. And I'll go through this fairly quickly and leave a minute for some questions if you want me to dig in a little bit further on some of these. Some are pretty obvious or that we know already. A prompt is the text that you send to the AI interface to get a response or to an API. GPT stands for generative pre-training transformer. I'll be honest, I had to look that up. I always forget. But I wanted to put it in here to kind of give you an idea, like if you wondered what that acronym stands for. So ChatGPT is a product from OpenAI. GPT is a term coined by, I believe, OpenAI in their process of building this. But it's also a term that can apply to other generative AI that is not by this company. So that's what the GPT and ChatGPT stands for. LLM is a term that we haven't used today, but you may hear. And it's essentially, it describes what ChatGPT uses behind the scenes. It stands for large language model. Sometimes I call it llama, just because of the letters in the acronym. But essentially, it's a model that is generated by training on large amounts of language and human language and data, textual data. And different models do different things. In the case of ChatGPT, theirs is a human language model trained on billions and billions of parameters of data. There are much smaller large language models, even though they're still called large language, that are maybe 20 million parameters and do very specific things. Like there could be, for example, an LLM that is just around recipes. All it's good at is generating recipes, for example. Or another one that's just good at telling jokes. So those are things that people could develop on their own if they didn't want to use something like ChatGPT. Kind of involved, but it's possible. Priming, we've talked about, that's feeding ChatGPT or Bard or whatever additional information to give it context or knowledge that will help it give a better response. And then AI stands for artificial intelligence, which is kind of a broad term. You may get in arguments with people who say certain things are not considered artificial intelligence, but it's kind of a broad stroke term to define some of the concepts here. A neural network is I copy this definition from Google essentially, but it's a computer system modeled on the human brain and nervous system. So that's why it's called a neural network, but it just describes a process for how a computer learns based on trial and error and error responses. And then a token we talked about briefly, I used a loose definition for that, which is it's the words in a prompt and in the response. So if I say, tell me a joke, that's 4 tokens. Tell me a joke. That would be representative of 4 tokens. And if the response is, I don't know any jokes, I don't know any jokes is 5 more tokens. So the combined request and response there consists of a total of 9 tokens. Now, I say loose definition here because if you put an emoji in your request, an emoji might be a token. If you have numbers and other data, those get interpreted different ways as tokens, but generally a word or a number or a phrase or an emoji or whatever generally is considered a token. And it's not incredibly important for the chat interface, but when you get into using the API, it's definitely more important. And then we have the chatbot. What is a chatbot? It's a generative AI interface that allows a user to chat with the AI in a natural language. And OpenAI's ChatGPT and Google's Bard are 2 examples of that. I kind of made that description up on my own, but I think it's fairly representative. We're running out of time, so I'm going to dive into some quick bonus tips, and then we'll get to any questions to close this out. Saving code. There's an extension for that. We saw that. It was asked about. I will publish it at some point. And I will, if you look at my GitHub cheat sheet, I will put it in there. So if you bookmark that cheat sheet and watch for an update there, I'll put it in there. Probably in the next week, I'll get that published. There's probably other extensions that do a similar thing. Mine just adds a button to ChatGPT's interface to allow you to do it inline. Session sharing, you can go to ChatGPT and share a session. So you have a session list on the left. If you have multiple sessions and you want to have someone else have all that history and context, you can share it. It shares a link with them. And what it does is it copies the whole session to them, and any changes they make, you don't see. So it's now private to them, but it gives them all the context that you previously had in your session. And then the other tip here is just something we talked about, adding 1 session per topic. So if you're asking it to develop a fun little game of hangman, put that in 1 session. If you're asking for recipes, put in a new session. It keeps it clean and organized for you. ChatGPT automatically generates a session name based on the content of your session. So if you have one for recipes, it may say healthy recipes or whatever. And I'm sure as we go, we'll come up with more tips. I'm sure you'll come up with your own tips. Feel free to reach back out to us and share them. You can reach out. Joe.Colburn@integral.io is my email, but we also have our general email here, integrate@integral.io. I have been Joe Colburn. I will continue to be until the robots take over. And I'm open to any questions as we're in the last 5 minutes here. Let me get chat open so I can actually see our questions here.
Thanks, Joe. I definitely had fun today messing with ChatGPT, and I love seeing how it goes off the rails.
Yeah, it can go a little sideways sometimes. Here we go. There we go. Yeah, it can definitely get a little sideways. But with the right amount of the right mixture of patience, original prompts, and reprompting, it can go much better. A lot of practice goes a long way. And what I found to help me out a lot is don't wait until you need something from it. Just start coming up with ideas like we had to build a solar system, right? Something that you don't have a deadline or a need for, or that you're going to get frustrated because you just want it to work because it's something you're passionate about. Just come up with some, like, ask it to build a hangman game and get some practice, getting your prompts better there, learning what it does well at and doesn't do well at, and just experiment with kind of throwaway topics and ideas. And you'll learn a lot from those that you can apply when you really want it to respond quickly. So you can make the most use of your Saturday and build a game in a couple of hours on a Saturday. Ben asks, are there any predictions for where this space will be a few years from now, or are you hopeful for anything specific? Well, Sam Altman, who is the CEO, one of the founders of OpenAI, he did a talk in San Francisco that I was at where he discussed this a little bit. One of the things that he's passionate about is protecting its ability to overgrow itself. So when you think about something like Skynet, right? Will computers get to a point where they don't need us and they're going to take over and they're going to lock us out and all those things, right? And he warns about those kind of things. I don't think that's a huge concern currently. I know the companies building in this space, building artificial intelligence, have those protections in place, some guardrails, if as it were, to protect them against those kind of things, like your response there. But so that's not a thing I worry about. What I do see happening in the very near future is we're at a state where everything's very fresh and new, and it's hyped up and everyone's excited about it, and we're learning that it doesn't do everything, and it's not going to replace everyone's jobs like people are afraid of. Some people fear that developer jobs will go away. As you can see, that's not going to happen. You ask it for a modal and it doesn't even give you a modal. So if it were a developer, I'd probably fire it, but it's not. It's a very junior developer that's going to give you a lot of help and do some things that'll save you a lot of time, but it's not going to replace your ability to write code or your need to understand the code. I think as we go, we'll see more tools and plugins. They're starting to emerge a marketplace of plugins that that are more geared towards specific tasks. There's integrations into things like Visual Studio Code, where it's built to, for example, just write code for you and autocomplete code for you, and you don't have to ask it to do it. So I think the tool sets around generative AI is absolutely going to improve. I think we'll flush out new ideas about how it can be used, and we're seeing that almost daily. If you look on YouTube and you just search for the term AI, you'll probably find more videos today about how to use AI to make money in some automated workflow than you will about what AI is. There's a lot of people just figuring out new ways to use this stuff. So, and I would say ultimately, like, experiment and you'll discover new ways or ideas yourself. But I think in the next few years, we're going to see a similar kind of thing like we saw with Google and Yahoo early on, where and like we have now, where you have Google and Bing and other search engines all competing for your attention. You're going to see the same thing with ChatGPT and Google Bard and the one that I guess it's called XAI that Elon Musk is working on, and Meta's chatbot that they're working on. You're going to see all these companies competing, and eventually, one of them you'll find to be the one that you think is best. Sorry if you can hear my dogs going nuts. The mailman must be out there. So essentially, that's like, I think what the near-term future looks like for us is that we're going to see these companies competing to offer something more and more valuable, and they're going to be working really hard to make it do things better than what it's doing today. Right now, it's a little kludgy. It's not exactly what we're looking for, but it gets you really close, and I think we'll be seeing a lot of improvements just even in the next 12 months. A lot of the things that we have to ask it for twice, we won't have to ask for twice. Yeah, any other questions before we wrap up? It's right at noon, so I couldn't have timed that better, I guess. Great. I would like to throw this out there. We have classes, we try to do them every month, one a month. And there's also webinars that we put out. So to share additional information in maybe a slightly less interactive way. But we do these every month. We try for at least a webinar and a class every month. So make sure you're subscribed, or I forget what the terminology is, honestly, on Eventbrite, but you can get notifications for our new events. Follow us on LinkedIn. You'll see notifications there as well. And join in with us for the next class. I'll do another one of these in the future as more information comes out, more techniques come out, and we have different things to share. So with that, we'll wrap it up and let everyone enjoy your Saturday. I hope everyone has a great weekend. I believe, do we have a survey that we're sending out, Callie, or?
We don't have a survey today.
Well, I will say, if you have any feedback, feel free to share feedback on how we can improve our processes and integrate at integral.io. And if you love this class, please also send that to integrate@integral.io. If I did a horrible job, please send that to nobody@example.com. Just kidding. If I have improvements, also send that there. I'd love to improve on what I do too. And everyone have a great Saturday and a great weekend.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you all for joining. It means the world to us to have you here. I really appreciate it.
This was great. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend.
See ya.